The Holy See Condemnation, ANATHEMA, of the present abominations in the world, 23 March, 2024 Anno Domini. The official Apostolic Decree of the Holy Apostolic See of Rome, in exile, by His Holiness Pope Jacobus I, on the subject of the present time abominations and attacks against the Catholic Church, Catholic faith, and morals, in the world, and by the heretics, apostates, and the godless, and or by the perverted, and their usurpation of the apostolic authority of the divine institution Holy Mother Roman Catholic Church, which is to say, their heretical, sacrilegious, and thus null use of their own secular authority to pervert, and or their sacrilegious attempt to outright destroy the divinely established order which the Roman Catholic Church, in her infallible doctrine, papal decrees, and other doctrinal publications, has always defended, so that those who are subject to this abused secular authority are thus subject to heretical evil laws that outright contradict the Catholic faith and morals, and thus the abuse of justice and authority, which the secular state is today engaged in, constitutes a direct attack on the supreme teaching authority and the magisterial power of the rightful Sovereign Pontiff, and also an outright usurpation of the keys to the kingdom of heaven, which the Caesar, the secular state, has never been granted nor will be permitted to attempt to use, as that belongs solely and only to the rightful successors of St. Peter, the Apostle, by divine right. If therefore anyone would dare to contradict, refute, oppose, counter, and or otherwise attack and deny this our present decree, let him understand that by doing so he will incur the wrath of God Almighty and of the Apostles St. Peter and St. Paul. Given from our present exile, away from our rightful place in the Vatican City, in the 4th year of our visible pontificate, on the 23rd day of March, 2024 Anno Domini. Jacobus Primo, Papa et Pontifex.
Okay, so today we would like to publish this publication that's important because it touches on the matters of the relations of the Church with the state and secular state, and the secular state is engaged in gradual persecution of the Church, and that those who permit this are not part of the Church is self-evident truth with the visible structure that this state has put in place, because the state has engaged in a denial of the rights of the Church. And so the Church has to fight for her rights, and the devil, the master of these heretics, is engaged in sabotaging all these things because he doesn't want this to be published, and he is therefore attacking the Church any way he so chooses, and God permits this for our sanctification and so forth. So we will go to the initial excerpt and then present our condemnation of these doctrines and so forth.
The ipso facto excommunicated SSPV heretic William Jenkins here, allowing the propagation of the deplorable and anti-Catholic status quo situation in this world, without presenting the proper Catholic Church doctrine on the subject. His silence and allowance to let this stand without addressing it properly as condemned by the Church, and that the teaching authority belongs exclusively to the Roman Catholic Church by divine right, and that the state has no authority to control the education system at all. That is a heretical denial of the teaching authority of the Catholic Church as such, and the proof among others that Jenkins is an impostor to the Holy Catholic priesthood, him being silent on this important subject.
But that's when I knew the rule of law is gone. I mean, the sophistry and the doublespeak that goes on, and the opinions. So really, so that judges, other lawyers, and even citizens that would take the time to read cases, and they do, they're not going to understand what went on when they read the opinions, because the opinions are dishonest. Okay, and then that becomes precedent if everyone say, well, that's how that case was decided, I guess we should follow that. It's binding precedent, or whatever. So
the judges are dishonest in their writing of their opinions.
Yes, by what they say and what they don't say, and what I'd like to do is open with my latest war story in that regard, because it's my final appeal is pending in the Ohio Supreme Court right now, and they review very little cases. As we all know, the high courts are too good to hear most cases, and I don't expect them to review this one, but I would like to give the audience the facts of the case to give them an example of this dishonesty, and it's deliberate dishonesty. It's not like, oh, they didn't understand the law, or they might have just neglected to get some facts in there. You got to work hard to be this dishonest, you know. And so here's the facts of the case. Out of Delaware County, Ohio, right about 2 hours north of here, a school district called the Olentangy Local School District. And my client, a great Christian patriotic lady named Antoinette Evans, she goes by Tony Evans, self-supporting Italian woman, age 67, was working for years at this public school in that district, and she was a study hall monitor in the cafeteria.
So this in itself, we just have to pause here because we want to address this, because it's a subject of our today recording. This in fact denies the authority of the church as it is in Jenkins, this heretic that is from this fraudulent order of Society St. Pius V. He sits there and he doesn't say a word about it. That's his duty to correct this person who seems to be like a nice person, nice, you know, in a sense he's striving to, but he's allowing, he's engaged in error that the church has the authority to teach, and solely and only and exclusively is the Roman Catholic Church's authority to teach. That's why the inscription is there. So the state does not have authority to establish Department of Education or Ministry of Education. The state does not have authority to teach, to educate. The state does not have authority to exercise some kind of oversight over the Roman Catholic Church, what we teach, how we teach, and so forth. That doesn't exist. And that's by divine right. And so Jenkins sits there, the whole interview is about the cases of this lawyer, and like you said, he seems to be like a nice person as it is, and he says very, very things that, but this what he presented in the sense of introducing the error, like the public school teacher, that shouldn't be on Catholic program at all mentioned, because that's like insinuating to something that the church would, that the Catholics could just hear and absorb, and that's not permissible, because that's a heretical denial of the authority of the church and divine right of the church. So that's something that cannot exist. That the priest has to at least pause and say, "I just want to correct something." He would have to say, this heretic Jenkins, he doesn't do that at all, because the church has, the Roman Catholic Church, in the hands of those who are in good standing, is the sole authority in the education and sole arbiter in these matters of education of children. And then the parents, Catholic parents, you will have to introduce the canon law. The Catholic parents are obligated by canon law, constraints of the canon law, under the pain of excommunication, to supply the Catholic children with Catholic upbringing. That's a matter of canon law, 1917 Code of Canon Law. Jenkins is not introducing any of this. He's just silent there and just speaks. So we'll let it play just a little bit to introduce what's taking place, really. But this has to be addressed. And another heretical error is that somehow the state is allowed to participate in introducing the doctrine, or rather passing judgment on the doctrine of matters of faith and morals, because it touches on the Catholic faith, and the state has no authority to get involved and to exercise some kind of oversight or set the criteria or the life of the population to be guided by it or directed by it. That's impossible. So we will continue playing it a little bit longer.
So she had contact constantly with all the kids, many different races, colors, creeds in the school district. She was loved by all of them, and she loved them all. One of these Italians with just an oversized heart, you know. So one day she says to one of the students, during a break almost, he was about the only one in the room, she said to him, now this is COVID, this is 2021. She said to the student, can you believe that we got the COVID virus from China and now they are profiting with selling PPE equipment to the United States? And the student kind of laughed and said, yeah, you know, isn't that? Well, by the end of the day, she's suspended from school, told not to come back till there's a hearing. But allegedly, some student of partial Asian descent overheard that and was offended.
Okay.
And reported it to the principal, which isn't that what we always learned growing up in communism, you know, go report on your neighbor, that kind of thing. Reports her, she gets a call, don't come back to school till we have a hearing, we'll set it up. They set up a hearing, not a hearing, a fact-finding meeting. They admit it wasn't a due process hearing where she had a chance to for her rights and everything. And after that fact-finding meeting, within the next day, they just said, we're terminating you. The key to the case, for her, certainly, and for other kind of underground conservative thinking people in the school district, is that, if you'll excuse the expression, that school and the school district as a whole there, it's an orgy of liberal, pro-Marxist, anti-American, pro-homosexual, pro-transgender, just go right down the line. Christian parents, politically conservative parents are very upset by it. None of that ever gets punished. No one ever. And on social media, Tony had gotten disciplined once just for saying something on social media and responding to something that someone said. Violated the school social media policy. That was a prior discipline she had. The liberal teachers, social media, free for all, no discipline. Okay, so that's...
So another point that needs to be made, and Jenkins is silent about it. We have to move the camera a little bit. And that's the case of that this person calls this lady Christian. And then this heretic Jenkins has to raise his voice and say, well, hold on a second. This is inadmissible here. This is Catholic program. It's supposed to be Catholic program. And the only way to call yourself Christian, you have to belong to the church. The true Roman Catholic Church. You cannot belong to a heretical sect. You cannot be called Christian because nowadays Protestants call themselves Christian, but that's not true. They are heretics. And so they are outside the church that Christ instituted. And so you cannot be calling using the name of Christian without making that distinction, because otherwise that leads to heresy. That's the role of the priest. Now you can see you can see right here. You can see Jenkins right there. That's him, and his face, and he's like considering what's going on and what is being said, and he's not saying a word about it. He's not even correcting, or at least this is inadmissible to say it this way, because the church is in possession of the teaching authority. You cannot be introducing these doctrines and saying, oh, well, we just let it stand and tolerate it. No, the church is not allowed to tolerate this, period. We are not here to tolerate heretical errors. We are here to condemn them and to teach the truth of salvation. The faithful must hear the truth in order to be preserved from these errors that are being disseminated by the enemies of the church and ultimately by the devil himself. And that's why this has to be addressed by the authority of the priest. That's the proof, one of the proofs, among other many, that this heretic Jenkins isn't a pastor to Holy Catholic priesthood, does not possess the fullness of the priesthood, and self-evident truth is where he's coming from. That's the case. So we'll let it play longer, and then we'll go to our own main course of what needs to be published.
That's what's going on up there. So anyway, she ended up reaching me, and we filed a lawsuit in federal court. And interestingly, before we ever got to discovery or depositions, we mediated the case and got $100,000 settlement before anyone ever took a deposition. Okay, that was a federal lawsuit against the school, okay, the district, all that. But there was an unemployment claim she had made, which was worth $5,000 or something. We carved that out of the settlement because we wanted the courts to adjudicate and expose what that school district was doing. So we carved that out of the settlement, and they had an unemployment hearing, which was an administrative hearing done by phone. And we piled on 4 or 5 parents to tell everything they were unhappy about, and some students. And, we really packed a good record to show really the communist speech versus the Christian patriot speech and how it was treated. So we have an unemployment hearing, and this unemployment hearing officer writes an opinion that's like 7 pages long, does not mention any of our evidence, and just says she was fired for just cause. Okay. So we got to appeal that to the courts, and I said, great, we'll get in front of a real judge here, and he's got to review this. He reviews the whole record, which is what he goes by. We write briefs. He writes a 30-page opinion that tells all these things and the various things of her speech and this, that, and the other. Does not say a word about all the evidence in the record, about all the parents who were aggrieved, formed groups, met with the school. It's hilarious. They met with the superintendent wanting somebody to be disciplined for some pro-homosexual thing taught in the classroom or something, The superintendent said, and this is in the record in that case, to fire a teacher at Olentangy local school district, they have to hit a kid or come to school drunk. That's what he said. Nobody got fired, right, for all their Marxist speech. So that's in the record. I mean, it was powerful what we put in the record. Judge writes, and I make a point in my brief, the hearing officer whose decision you're reviewing ignored all our evidence, right? I'm pushing him on that. He writes a 30-page opinion, does not mention any of our evidence. So anyone reading it is just going to think, well, this is some out of control Italian lady, So I get to go to the Court of Appeals. I go to the Court of Appeals. You get 15 minutes to argue to an appellate panel. I first spend my first 3 minutes saying, this is the most disappointing thing I've seen in all my 35 years of practice, how judges will not address the facts of the case that are what really make it a case, Yeah. And I go and I like, they know it all. They know it all. They write a 30-page opinion summarizing what she's accused of in 5 pages and summarizing our evidence in 32 words. Okay. So I thought, okay, this is deliberate injustice, right? They are not going to, when you make an equal protection claim, okay, A is treated this way, B is treated this way for no lawful reason, right? How do you analyze that without telling both sides? How do you do that? But they weren't going to do it because they knew if they put our facts in the record, they would have to rule in our favor. They would have to, or they would look corrupt to the general public, right?
We will go to our presentation as it is because we have addressed this point very carefully already. So this plain defect of sin of omission that just simply cannot exist like this. It's just no way that something can be tolerated like this. This point right here, and that's a quotation from on the bottom from Syllabus of Errors, and the upper one is our doctrine. And there's no legislative nor executive argument that can induce or force a human soul to be in conscience against the truth and justice of God, nor can anyone be compelled or coerced nor forced by legislative or executive secular power to forego or compromise on this God-given right, because all that opposes justice and truth is by this very definition injustice and a lie. And thus, by following injustice and lies, a man effectively forfeits his admission to the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, no secular power has, and never will have, any such authority to enact injustice and a lie into secular law. All God-given rights of man are protected by this definition, and no one may be coerced to violate them. This has always been the true infallible doctrine of the true Roman Catholic Church. And below that, that's taken from the Syllabus of Errors of our predecessor, Blessed Memory, Pius IX, as infallible doctrine, and it's condemned. What is called as proposition as condemned The successful injustice of a fact brings with it no detriment to the sanctity of right. Of course it does. It brings in detriment of proportions, phenomenal proportions. So it virtually destroys it as it is. So then this in itself is that's from encyclical letter of our predecessor of blessed memory, Pope Leo XIII. And the point that we would like to show is point 15 of this encyclical. And read it thoroughly because it shows the doctrine that is necessary to be presented. And this one right here. And it says, the one only reason which men have for not obeying, that means the secular power, is when anything is demanded of them which is openly repugnant to the natural or the divine law, but it is equally unlawful to command to do anything in which the law of nature or the will of God is violated. If therefore it should happen to anyone to be compelled to prefer one or the other, viz. to disregard either the commands of God or those of rulers, he must obey Jesus Christ, who commands us to give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's, and must reply courageously after the example of the apostles. We ought to obey God rather than man, and yet there is no reason why those who so behave themselves should be accused of refusing obedience. For, and this is the important part right here, for if the will of rulers is opposed to the will and the laws of God, they themselves exceed the bounds of their own power and pervert justice, nor can their authority then be valid, which, when there is no justice, is null. The authority is null, the person forfeits that authority, because all authority comes from God. And the Holy See Condemnation anathema means cursed, excommunicated, of the present abominations of in the world. And so we go to the next page. That's the inscription that we put in the beginning, so we're not going to read it again, but we go directly to Canon 1. If anyone saith that the teaching authority granted by God solely and exclusively to the divine institution Roman Catholic Church can, should, or without any exception is transferred to the secular or any non-Catholic authority, and that the secular state in its so-called department or ministry of education, unquote, is the sole and only authoritative arbiter in matters of education and morals, supported and fortified in secular laws and prohibitions and mandatory code of conduct of the population, and this solely and only by the deciding rule of the secular state court system, and that the Holy Apostolic See in the person of the rightful Sovereign Pontiff should be and is denied the divinely given powers of the keys to teach the truth of salvation and morals by the state, and denied or declined recognition of the divinely given supreme teaching authority of the Roman Catholic Church in the rightful Sovereign Pontiff. If anyone does so, let him be anathema. That means cursed, excommunicated, and God will visit him in punishment. Canon 2. If anyone saith that the secular state and its executive, legislative, and court justice branches can freely, legitimately, and judicially define in law the proper and fully in conscience binding meaning of the already established term by God in his divine and natural law of a legitimate matrimony, and that the secular power has authority to deny that this same legal matrimony is solely and only legitimate between two persons, a naturally born man and a naturally born woman, and or if anyone saith that the use of the term lawful legitimate matrimony should be or could be applied to the sodomite and or to the so-called transgender quote, unions, unquote, between the same-sex naturally born human persons, which, quote, unions, unquote, are not legitimate marriages and are by divine law forbidden, or, quote, unions, unquote, between one man and more than one woman, etc., and that the divine institution of the Roman Catholic Church must be denied any or all contrary doctrines and teachings on this subject, nor any legal protection against the intrusion of the secular state against this divinely instituted sacrament of holy matrimony, which only and solely the Catholic Church in her papal authority and doctrine has authority to protect, define, and to impose its constraints and laws. If anyone does so against the Church, let him be anathema. That means cursed again, excommunicated. God will visit him punishment. Punishment of Sodom and Gomorrah is not a small matter, as recorded in Holy Scripture. So, Canon 3. And if anyone said that the divine institution of the Roman Catholic Church in the rightful Sovereign Pontiff should be denied by the secular state his divinely given teaching authority to define and teach the proper Catholic doctrines, prohibitions, and constraints in matters of Catholic faith and morals, also in regards to the Church's authority of teaching and upbringing of children, and if anyone holds that the secular power of the state has the sole authority to dictate how the children are educated, and that the Catholic Church could and should be legally restrained or fully prevented from the free exercise of this teaching authority, and this additionally without interference and without the state oversight, this authority from prevented from, and this additionally that means prevented that the state would have the authority to prevent the Church from exercising the teaching authority and without interference and without the state oversight, and that the Catholic Church should not be allowed to exercise this authority to teach the Catholic faithful the matters of faith and morals and any other teaching disciplines the Catholic Church chooses to impose on her subjects, and that those who are the rightful Catholic clerics and teachers authorized by the Catholic Church's rightful papal magisterial authority to be in charge of education and in directing the rightful Catholic parents or legitimate guardians in their task of upbringing their children, let him be anathema. If anyone hampers that and anyone goes against this, let him be anathema, means cursed, excommunicated, horrible punishment as it is, sentence of hell. So, Canon 4. If anyone said that the divine institution of the Roman Catholic Church is subject to the interpretation of the natural and divine law as sees fit by the opinions, legislative acts, and judicial code of the secular power of the state, so if the Church if anyone says that the Church is subject to these interpretations performed by the state, and that the Catholic Church in her magisterial authority and the rightful Sovereign Pontiff in his supreme legislative and judicial authority has no say nor any authoritative voice to condemn the heretical and thus anti-Catholic laws enacted by the secular state, and that the Catholic Church should be censored and prevented from freely expressing her infallible doctrine in all matters, including matters of faith and morals, church discipline, and matters of condemnation of various pernicious doctrines, ideologies, philosophies, and opinions, them substantively in essence as non-Catholic, that means apostate, heretical, or atheistic. And if anyone said that the rightful Holy Apostolic See should be silenced, censored, and otherwise prevented from freely transmitting in any way, by any means, these papal magisterial infallible doctrines in such matters of Catholic faith, morals, discipline, and prohibitions, etc., and if anyone holds that the Catholic Church is fully or partially subordinated to all decisions, executive, legislative, and judicial, of the secular state, let him be anathema. Canon 5. If anyone said that the Catholic Church, through her rightful Sovereign Pontiff, has no authority to legislate and enact her laws in temporal, disciplinary, magisterial, canonical, and theological matters, and that the Catholic Church is not allowed to enact such laws, and in fact is subject to their interpretation by the secular state, and that the Catholic Church and the Holy Apostolic See could and should be penalized by the state for any and all its non-compliance to such demands and judicial acts of the state, and that the secular state is free to exercise any and all oversight over any and all matters of the Catholic Church, contrary to the infallible doctrine of the Church previously and now expressed, including the infallible, proscribed, and condemned propositions enumerated in the Silvus Severus of our predecessor of blessed memory, Pope Pius IX, 1864, Anno Domini, effectively excluding Caesar from the matters of God. These doctrines of Pius IX and our doctrine, obviously, in the deeper sense as it is, effectively excluding Caesar from the matters of God and of his Roman Catholic Church. And if anyone said that the state is free to even incarcerate any true Catholic clerics for any disobedience or any non-compliance to such secular state enacted codes, laws, and doctrines, let him be anathema. Canon 6. If anyone said that the Catholic Church has no authority to condemn, therefore to command, instruct, and direct her Catholic subjects, including the Church's doctrine, and commands to avoid and disobey secular states' mandates and laws in matters prescribed by the Holy Apostolic See as pernicious and condemned, and are otherwise detrimental to salvation of the soul if the Church's prohibition is disobeyed, including but not limited to the mandates of the state or any other entity that could imperil the practice of the Catholic faith and protection of Catholic morals, thus the lives of the Catholic subjects, including while active in their places of private or public employment, which is to say, those only employment means which the Catholic subjects are permitted in conscience by the Church to hold. And if anyone said that the Catholic Church has no authority to condemn any mandates of the state involving law and penal enforcement of mandates of various medical procedures and inoculations, which mandated medical procedures by the secular state constitute clear abuse of authority on part of the secular state, including the enforcement of state-ordered mandatory vaccinations against various symptoms or potential symptoms of viruses, which abuses of secular authority were previously fully prescribed, condemned, and reprobated by apostolic letters and other publications of the Holy Apostolic See, and its decrees are thus binding in conscience all Catholic faithful to obey and follow, but those who hold to the contrary, let him be anathema. In Canon 7, if anyone said that the Catholic faithful are primary subjects and must be subordinated firstly to the secular authority of the state, and that the Catholic Church is divinely given authority over the consciences of the Catholic subjects is only secondary or diminished or eliminated as the times progressed, and because of the general acceptance of these changes of times, so that the Catholic faithful must first and foremost follow and obey without any exception all state laws and codes of conduct and all legislative, judicial, and or executive acts, legislative bills, or any other judgments and secular codes, etc., even if they contradict in any way the constraints of Catholic faith and morals, and have been condemned by the Holy Apostolic See as pernicious and or anti-Catholic, and thus never be obeyed in conscience, must never be obeyed in conscience. And if anyone said that such laws take always precedent and are superior to those of God and of His Church, even if these secular laws, judicial acts, and legislative, etc. codes violate the laws of God and nature, and if they violate the Catholic Church's doctrine, discipline, and the 1917 Anno Domini Code of Canon Law, and the Church's precepts, let him be anathema. And of course, there is many more points that could be presented as it is, but we have demonstrated in the sense of our work today that the essential part of being Catholic is to be obedient to the commandments of God and to be obedient to the precepts and doctrine of the Church, infallible doctrine, because the doctrine is received from God by the assistance of the Holy Ghost, who is within the bosom of the church. And therefore, those who decide that they would live the life of sin or life of disobedience to these constraints that lead them to sanctification of their soul, to choose to be part of the Catholic Church, then they will be outside of the church, schismatics, heretics, depending on what it is. But if it's something that touches matters of faith and moral, yes, they are heretics in that case. And that's the case today, because people have progressed in their sliding away from the proper doctrine of the church and from the constraints that lead them to be protected by God, because any disobedience to His church severs the soul from that divine protection and mercy of God, and so then God will not supply the grace, because He says so. God resisted the proud and giveth grace to the humble, and therefore humility and obedience, strict obedience to the doctrine of the church, and being subject to the rightful Sovereign Pontiff, at present that's our person by divine selection as it is. We have demonstrated this many times, and our doctrine stands as it is. And then when people decide that they will not hold it sacred and holy, and that they will obey it in conscience, even at the cost of their lives, and that they will rather follow the teachings of heretics or their omissions, as we have shown in the beginning of this publication of this Our Decree, in that notorious heretic Jenkins. So when they are like this, then they have to understand that the church will not force them to be Catholic. Then they are severed from that chance of salvation by way of excommunication, and they are on their own, and God will not help them to recover unless they renounce these errors, unless they are punctual in doctrine, unless they follow the teaching of the church and doctrine that was always presented by the Holy Apostolic See, and that was always held and protected and decreed as it is. And so we, as a Sovereign Pontiff, cannot go against the teaching of our predecessors, with the exclusion of non-Catholic sect that they are not predecessors. They are not, they were never, the Novus Ordo sect, they were never part of the church, because by way of excommunication for heresy, they severed themselves from the union of the church. So we don't follow their false doctrine, or heretical doctrine, but we speak of those who were truly popes. And that goes all the way back to our predecessor, blessed memory, Pius XII. We don't follow Roncalli, because Roncalli, although he obtained the papacy validly, and there's no proof, so far there's no proof that he was already excommunicated as heretic for heresy, because there has to be public heresy. He was visible in entering the conclave. There's video footage that we have presented before of him entering, so he was validly elected, became Pope John 23rd. But then they wanted to obtain the papacy in order to begin to destroy by way of abusing that authority, which they therefore lost by producing those evil fruits, including when Roncalli promulgated heretical and absolutely null Pontifical Romanum, that means the book of ceremonies that are reserved to bishop, among which one of the most important, if not the important one for the continuation of the church, apostolic succession, is episcopal consecration. That's what Roncalli destroyed for themselves, and that's how he severed himself from the papacy, because possessor of the keys to the kingdom of heaven is not holding the keys when he becomes heretic. And Roncalli was enemy of the church with communist connections, and that's what started it. That was the beginning of 1962, Anno Domini. And we have demonstrated this in our publications. But these are the fruits. What we have demonstrated on that example of Jenkins, him being silent, there are many more. But him being silent, but these things are said when he has to stop and say, just wait a minute, this is not what we allow here to be said, because the church is the sole proprietor and possessor of the apostolic authority to teach. Our Lord said to the apostles, not to anybody else, go and teach all nations. And the church possesses, because the primary reason for human life is to save one's soul for God, to be with God for all eternity. That's the essence of life. And if that is subverted into creating heaven on earth for itself, then there's no salvation, because that's contrary to the doctrine or to the intent divine intention of God, why we were created to His likeness and image. And so, since we are created to His likeness and image, that means that we have to become like Him in order to be with Him for all eternity. That means the sanctification of the soul has to take precedence, and that is only possible within the bosom of the Holy Mother Church. Has to take precedence in the life of human soul. And if that is negated by a life of sin, and by absorbing fraudulent and heretical doctrines as the guidance of that life, then God leaves that soul to his own misery. And then these false doctrines are presented as the truth, and it is not the truth. And then the enemies of the church, who intruded themselves into the bosom of the church, are disseminating more and more by vast numbers of production and publications and so forth, and then we are overwhelmed with work. But that's our duty towards God, to produce these things so that those who watch them may at least reconsider where they stand with God. And we just hope and pray that there will be more and more who will reconsider, because this is something that is inadmissible, that people think that they can just plainly disobey the church and follow false doctrines of heretics. God will see to it, and He will show them that's not the case. So that should suffice today. Our presentation is concluding. Our decree is binding in conscience, and if anyone decides to disobey it or contradict it, attempt to contradict it, or somehow deny its validity or refute it and so forth, or disobey it in conscience, let him be understood that he will incur the wrath of God Almighty and of the apostles St. Peter and St. Paul, and will be anathema according to those canons that we have presented. So that should suffice today. It is the dogma divinely revealed outside the Roman Catholic Church, which means this, which is today presented solely only we are diminished in numbers so badly by this Holy Apostolic See of Rome in exile. Outside this church, there's absolutely no salvation. All heretics, infidels, or apostates, or enemies of the church like the socialists, communists, atheists, and so forth, they all burn in hell and will burn in hell. That includes all the heretical fraudulent orders and this noble sect, apostate sect, with communist connections. And that should suffice today.